Hello and welcome to So You Think You Can Dev, a KMS podcast on all things digital. Today, I'm really excited to be here with Tamara Adlin, an author, speaker, and consultant in the fields of user experience, startup strategy, and career development, especially for women and especially in technology. Welcome, Tamara.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
I'm super excited to talk to you. Could you give us a little bit of information about your background and areas of expertise?
Sure. I came up through the magical world of user experience. I got my master's at University of Washington way back in 1996, and then worked at startups, then worked at Amazon for 3 years in the early years, 2002 to 2005, and was writing the Persona Lifecycle book, co-authoring that during that time, and then went out on my own as a consultant in 2005, and have been doing that ever since. And my specialty is really early stage startups and bigger companies that want to behave more like startups or are working on a pivot or a new product idea. And I'm really I become more of a product strategist. And the way that I do that is I believe the biggest problem for most products in terms of the experience of using them tracks all the way back to misalignment among the key stakeholders and often the executive team on exactly what they're trying to build, why, and for who. And when that misalignment exists, then it doesn't matter how great your team and your process is. 6 weeks down the line, when you have your first design review, suddenly I call it a tornado sweeps through, where an executive comes in and says, "Why does it look that way? That's not what we asked for." So that's the part that I'm really fascinated with. So that sort of fits in line, I think, with a lot of what you guys do, which is coming in and doing new ideas for projects, helping with process, um, and helping establish companies maybe when they want to sort of have that startup energy for a project or an idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're touching on with alignment is so critical when it comes to projects that are actually useful for end users. Um, the other thing I'd love to dive into is your startup experience. So you have a wealth of experience, as you said, in early stage startups, which are really at the forefront of disruptive technologies. We're seeing so much come out right now with AI, blockchain. But how can someone like a mid-market or an enterprise company adapt that startup mindset to be competitive in these emerging tech fields?
Well, part of part of my answer is don't behave like a startup in some ways. Don't lose your ever-loving mind over the hype cycles that keep coming through. I think that especially in disruptive tech, early stage startup founders, they get money thrown at their faces just for saying the right keywords. And there's a lot of hubris there, and there's a race to be the first. And as many established companies know, being first doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to win. And especially, I think it's an advantage that you're an established company, that you're not out there fighting for the next round of funding. You can actually be smart and look ahead to how will this technology help my customers do the things that make my business thrive, as opposed to we've got to add more AI or we've got to get this on the blockchain, which is
Hmm.
never a good idea. Even though it seems like you're missing the boat, you're not missing the boat. If you know your customers better than anybody else, then no startup can catch up to you. No disruptive technology can disrupt you because you have your fingers on the pulse of what actual humans need to do on a daily basis. So starting there is always my perspective.
Got it. I think that's a great perspective, especially when new technologies come into play. I think people have a mindset of let's integrate, let's adapt at all costs. Whereas you can't lose the entrenched knowledge that you've built up over time, and what you know of your own customers, processes, and products. Now,
I can
given
give you a great
that,
example. Let me just cut in with an
yeah.
example. Like disruptive technologies have been happening for the last 25 years. Like I can remember when community features were the disruptive technology. And that was like, I don't know, 15 years
Hmm.
ago. But I was working with a bank at the time, like a big bank. And they were like, we have to integrate community features into our site because, and I was like, why would anybody want to hang out on a bank website? It just didn't make any sense to have this. We got to have a flourishing community around people who have accounts at our bank. So I just like to remember that, because as silly as that looks in retrospect, you have to assess your own hype reaction to ask, am I trying to build a community on a banking website? Just that's anyway, I wanted to share that story.
No, I love that. I think that's a perfect example. And I think that that's a good question too, is when we are seeing disruptive technologies as we've seen for decades, how do you know when it's time to break things that you have or when it's time to bolster the pillars of your company? How do you make that calculus?
Well, again, I think you start with your customer. So I think that it is important for companies to have people who are very much taking the pulse of what's out there, which is very difficult to do in things like AI because it's changing so fast. But for example, with AI, you can sort of see what it's getting really good at doing. It's getting really good at anything that's a tedious task will very soon be taken over by AI. And so for example, where I would start is, where are there tedious tasks that I have in my company? Where are there tedious tasks that my customers have that are extremely highly related to whatever services or features or functionality that I'm offering them? And I would start there with, additive things that sort of take away tediousness. And while you're doing that, keep an eye on the bigger trends. But again, it's how can I be a relief to my customers? How can I be the first one they think of when they have problem X? And that may not be about big new features. It may be about taking away little problems. So the overarching thought that I have, that I come from, is technology changes fast, but people do not. So people's goals, their wants and needs change actually very slowly. The technology used to support that changes fast, but the goals and wants and needs I have looking for a pair of shoes aren't that different than maybe a woman looking for a pair of shoes in 1890. Now, the shoes are slightly different, and the way I get my hands on them is different, but my wants and needs not that different. And so if we can always come back to that, that's always going to be the ultimate litmus test for, should I be investing in this new tech? Should I be changing what I have right now? Is it a way to still satisfy those core wants and needs, um, and take away pain points that my customers already have?
Mm. Yeah, I think that when you talk about human wants and needs aren't changing that fast, that kind of has two angles to it. One is your customers. What do your customers want and need, and how can you deliver that? And then there's also
Mhm.
you and your team and the kind of entrenched processes and people that you have at your company. So when you do have these very entrenched teams and product dynamics, how do you approach those situations when it can be hard to shift, even if the world outside is changing? What do you recommend when you're dealing with these really entrenched dynamics?
I love this question because I look upstream. So, the way I describe my perspective on alignment is that if you take any design and dev process, we always are comparing it to building a house, at least in user experience. Like in user experience, we say you don't want to build a house that doesn't have a bathroom, and you want to be able to walk through the house before you start building it virtually, so that you can see if it really is the house that you want, and do usability testing on the prototype. That's all like building a house. And when you build an actual house, you have a crew that's out on a piece of land, and they're trying to optimize, when is this contractor coming in? Do we have the right materials? Should we change into recycled wood planks instead of regular wood planks? And we're really, really focused there. And to me, that is the design and dev process, or the double diamond process for UX, or anything like that. We're really focused there. And then and those are the entrenched processes. And we tune and we tweak and we fix. Some of those processes are actually defensive or immune responses to other things going on. Like, and I can't think of a great example, but like who you get stuff from or whatever. My analogy is falling apart. Where I like to look is upstream. And I like to ask, okay, we can optimize, optimize, optimize. But no matter how good we get at building that house on that site, if a tornado comes through, it's going to decimate the process, right? And I think what we need to do is say, where do those tornadoes come from? And to me, the tornadoes come from misalignment up the chain. It's almost like your executive team is like the Greek gods, right? And if the
Hmm.
Greek gods start fighting, like Zeus and Poseidon start fighting, that what happens is like lightning bolts and tornadoes come down on the mere mortals. And I think it's kind of similar that disconnects and arguments and conversations that you never get to the end of and shifting goals are actually the thing that are one of the reasons you have these entrenched processes that may or may not be working because people are just trying to do work in the best way they know how in a landscape where a tornado could happen or an earthquake could happen. So that's the way I like to look at it is before I start tweaking how people are behaving on the building site, I like to look upstream and say, how are they getting where is the clarity coming from? Is it sticking? Is that
Hmm.
alignment sticking? And are they able to have what I call the magical sentence, which is if our primary goal for the next release is to reduce customer service calls by 15%, if we don't make Carly complainer ridiculously happy, what are we doing? And so I have this persona perspective, but I like to create what I call alignment personas where the stakeholder teams create them together collaboratively. And then you're able to have that really fundamental question so that later on, 6 weeks down the line, when somebody comes in and says, make the logo bigger, anyone on the team can say, that's going to take 3 weeks of dev work. Can you tell me how that helps Carly?
Hmm.
Or have we changed our goal? If we have, that's your prerogative. You make more money than I do, but at least now we know, right?
Hmm.
And we have a chance of disrupting some of the chaos that impacts the process versus just focusing on the process and trying to tweak something that is at the mercy of something bigger.
No, absolutely. And I think when you talk about alignment, I know you've done a lot of work speaking about how misaligned teams can show up in the final product. So I'd love to get your perspective on that and why, how does it show up in products for end users and why does that matter?
I call it corporate underpants. I wrote
Mhm.
a blog post called Corporate Underpants, and which is basically like saying, your org structure issues can absolutely show up in your product, like visible panty lines ruining an outfit, right? And that is a tongue-in-cheek way of restating something called Conway's Law, which is that we tend to launch our org structure in some way, shape, or form. And there's a sort of a joke about that if you look at the design of the car, it's very easy to tell if the dashboard team doesn't like the gear shift team, right? Because they don't go together. And Conway's Law speaks better on that. And I think misalignment is where that comes from. I think that it's really interesting to look at the sociological problems in in the exec team itself. And the reason this happened is because I wrote these books on personas and I started getting calls from people saying we want to do a persona effort. And within 5 minutes, the real issue that they were trying to spend $250,000 on research to solve was that the VP of marketing and the CTO couldn't be in the same room together. They were
Hmm.
trying to solve arguments and communication issues and disagreements in the executive team, which I found fascinating. And I still think the idea of changing the conversation away from what it is and changing it to is Carly or Philip the one we want to satisfy more is super duper effective. I don't think data is the way to do that because data is, believe it or not, doesn't solve those arguments.
Hmm.
But that's where this idea of alignment came from. And I think even small shifts towards alignment, and I would challenge all of you listening to this who say to yourself, oh, we're totally aligned. No, you aren't. And I'll tell you the way to test that. Send out an email to some people in your org and ask them what the top three objectives are for whatever project they're working on. And they're going to come back all over the place. Ask them for numbers, right? Are we trying to increase this by 20% or 80%? Don't Nobody should get in trouble and they should answer you anonymously, but you're going to find out what you think is crystal clear is absolutely not, especially down the chain.
I think that's a great exercise. I think that would be
I'm sure you do
great.
that as consultants too. Like when you come in, like when I come in as a consultant, I always say, well, what are your top three business goals with numbers? And they always say, well, you can take that out of the contract because we already have that as an exercise. And they never send it to me because they're written at the beginning of the year. Every time more than one stakeholder is in a room together, they shift slightly. No one writes it down. And it is politically impossible to raise your hand and say, I don't know what our goals are anymore if you're a VP or above.
Hmm.
And you guys probably find that too in your projects, like getting to crystal clarity on what does success look like? How will we know we nailed it when we deliver to you the wonderful product that we're going to deliver or the process improvements? These things that should be obvious just aren't. They slip and slide behind our backs and we don't notice it.
Oh, they absolutely are not clear most of the time. I think when we come in to talk to tech companies, a lot of the times there are significant, there might be problems with the technology itself, and that's something that in some ways is easier to fix than problems with team dynamics or leadership problems. But I think that to your point, those can often be the source of the technical problems rather than just an aside to them.
Yeah, and I think all projects should start with an alignment workshop. That doesn't have to take a long time. It doesn't take the last thing you need to get aligned is more data. You
Mhm.
don't need more. You need to just see what you just need a couple of easy exercises to say, what does everybody think the goals are and how can we get together on that? And I think you need a new vocabulary to do that, which is why I like doing these alignment personas together.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that in your consulting work and services work, it's the same thing. And sometimes people come to providers like you or me saying, we want to build X. The real question is, what problem are you trying to solve? And
Mhm.
I'm sure that's why you guys also do some process work, because sometimes that's really the problem
Yeah,
that they're trying to
absolutely.
solve.
Absolutely. I think it's the product, the team, all is working together, all integrated, and they all need to be addressed at the same time. And speaking of goals, right? And what do we want to get out of this? I think that's a big question right now with AI and blockchain, which are kind of the trendy, disruptive technology forces. Is okay, they're here. We all need to adopt them, we think, because everyone else is adopting them. Um, what is the goal with that? And I think the question that I'd really love to know based on your expertise working with these teams and dealing with alignment is knowing that generative AI is highly disruptive. It can be a big challenge for companies who are looking to integrate it and integrate it effectively. So, how would you suggest that companies approach that?
Um, hmm. Again, I would come back to what problem. I always come back to exactly what problem you're trying to solve. Instead of going directly to the solution and saying we need to build X, Y, and Z, it's what problem are you trying to solve and how are you going to integrate it in. Frankly, I would look at some of the bigger companies and how they're sort of poking it into play. Like I don't know exactly, but like how Microsoft is poking generative AI into Word or whatever, and how Google is poking it in. I think it's too early to have exactly the right answer for this. But I think one thing that is safe to assume is that it's way too hard for most human beings to understand or even start using generative AI. It's too complicated, like blockchain, too complicated. And that the people who approach these technologies with how can I make this invisible? How can I just deliver the value? It's not about going out there and waving a flag and say we're at AI, we have the best AI. It's about waving the flag and saying we make it easiest to figure out where to invest your money or whatever it is that you do as an SMB, especially for B2B.
Mhm.
So again, that's just always where I start. And I don't I think it's I think anybody listening to this, if you are doing like big AI projects, you should go and figure out like because people into AI coding and all of that stuff are really into the hype and really into the advanced features. Meanwhile, I bet you the features that would help your customers the most are really basic and fundamental, and not the cool, advanced, shiny stuff that your AI devs are really excited about.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that that is right on the nail. Is where the value that generative AI can create is probably not the most technically advanced version of it. So like you said,
Yeah,
look,
I mean, if you
oh,
have the magical sentence like our goal is to reduce call center calls by 20%, and we really are going to do that by looking at Carla's entire experience end to end, the places in there where AI can help are going to be targeted, and probably related to like how, first of all, can she find a way to ask it online? How irritating is that chat bot that you put up as your customer service thing instead of doing real humans? Like, you really need to ask yourself, how irritating is this to Carla? And in fact, AI stuff is irritating Carla more because the stupid freaking ask a question chat bot is always wrong, right? So, anyway, that's where I go to.
no, absolutely. And kind of on that note, where do you see the greatest opportunities with new emerging technologies, either AI or what's to come in the future?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, you know, like with blockchain, it was supposed to be this massively disruptive thing to everybody. And to me, what was interesting about it is that it ended up being more like rewiring your house. So if you rewire your house, it's a giant project. Your light switch doesn't change, right? And I think blockchain for most humans is going to be like that. It's dealing with all these rails for financial transactions and value and all this other stuff and cryptocurrency, blah, blah, blah. For the things that it will change, it's going to be a nightmare for a user experience. So, for example, like now, if you are into cryptocurrencies, then suddenly there are a million currencies instead of just one for every country, and your bank account is also an investment account. Which are nightmares from a UX perspective and a product perspective. But the vast majority of it is invisible, and the light switch works the same. So I think that's an interesting thing, right? That if 85% of it's invisible and you approach it that way, I think that sets you up well to also then clearly see, oh my God, the account now is going to be something that we really need to like be creative and design well, because it's going to confuse the living crap out of everybody
Hmm.
that comes into it. So
No, absolutely. I like that you take it back to the UX, right? And back to the value and back to the goal is are we is the technology that we're leveraging going to help us retain and reach new customers or not?
that's it. It's not about, are we spending as much as our competitor on AI in the fear that they're going to reach out ahead of us? The thing that will always give you the business advantage is knowing your customer better than the other guy. And that is so fundamental and has nothing to do with hiring 700 AI engineers. It has to do with, do not fire your UX people. Do not fire your product people. Hire an additional user researcher. If you want to know the best way to implement AI, hire user research. I swear to you, that is going to give you the competitive advantage, because they're going to go and find out what your customers need while your competitor is busy creating 17 new AI things that are just going to end up being confusing and make their interface harder. You are out there realizing that if you solve one tiny problem, your customers are going to love you for the rest of their lives, right?
Hmm.
So that's my suggestion. If you want to be ahead, hire a user researcher or a user experience designer who also does that kind of thing, not compete for 17 of the best AI blockchain devs that are out there.
No, absolutely. I love that perspective. And another thing that I'm super excited to talk to you about, that's a little bit of a segue, is as a woman in tech, I think you have a lot of experience that you can share. So I'd love to get your advice or some takeaways that you would want to give to other women in tech who are seeking resources.
Oh, sure. Okay. So yes, women in tech is a big thing for me. It has been. I think as you there's an article I wrote called Elation Deflation, the exhaustion and responsibility of being a senior woman in tech. We have to figure out how to help each other. We have to figure out how to talk about money, and we always have to worry about titles when we get new jobs. Those
Mhm.
are like big things, and talking about money with each other is really important too, because we got to solve this problem ourselves with equity. The biggest issue right now, though, is that everybody's losing their job.
Mhm.
And as somebody who's been a mentor and coach to women for a long time, my friend Phil Terry, who I've known since 2002, who runs these executive councils that I was on when I was at Amazon, wrote a book called Never Search Alone. And it is a giant free network, private safety net for people looking for work. It is 100% free. I mean, you have to get your hands on the book, which is $10 or borrow it from the library, but it's kind of like AA for job seekers. So if you're looking for work right now, you should go check out Never Search Alone or phil.org. I'm sure we can put that on there. I run these LinkedIn Lives and these orientations for it. It's a vast volunteer network. No one gets paid. And it'll help you find a job search counsel to help you figure out exactly what job you want next and how to redo your materials so that you are very competitive with your resume, your LinkedIn profile, all of those things without you don't have to hire a coach. It's a peer mentoring thing and a program, a step-by-step program that's about 11 weeks. That's what I'm promoting right now. That's why I'm giving so much volunteer time to this, because people need a lot of help right now, and we can all help each other, and it doesn't have to be something where we have to hire somebody who's charging us a lot of money to coach us. And so that I feel passionate about that. And I think it's especially great for women in tech, because in the process of doing that, you create something called a candidate market fit statement, which is kind of like a product market fit statement. And it's about you as you're not an item for sale, but your professional self is something that you should have as clear of a value proposition and differentiator as you would for any product that you might be working on.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's a fantastic resource for people to look into. Again, that's Never Search Alone.
Yep,
And Tamara, you also have a podcast of your own called Corporate Underpants. Yes.
I do. Yes, I do. I do. I just started it, and corporate underpants is the problem, and alignment is the solution. So I told you what corporate underpants is, and of course, I had to use that for my podcast. So in the Corporate Underpants podcast, I'm interviewing guests who are talking about real sort of catastrophic examples of how misalignment killed a product or a speech, whatever, killed a process. I'm also talking about how early stage alignment among key stakeholders or executives changes that picture completely. So what I'm trying to do is it's not, I'm not interviewing people who've written books and all that stuff. I'm interviewing real people in the trenches in the world of product uh, and tech, who are sharing these train wreck stories that feedback I'm getting is, oh, I'm really glad somebody's finally sharing how hard this really is and how these things go wrong in really wacky ways. And I'm sort of promoting it as experience by osmosis. If you hear how other people dealt with a tornado, or dealt with a client changing their mind 8 weeks in, or dealt with one person saying the wrong thing during a meeting and disrupting, like one story was one guy in a meeting with the client said, well, what about mobile? And it killed the whole project just by one sentence, because you can imagine, I'm sure people listening to this can imagine like how that happened. So that's my fascination, is telling those stories, showing people, maybe if you listen to it, you don't have to go through it. And then also talking about how early stage alignment really changes everything. So
Awesome.
that's
No,
it.
thank you so much, Tamara, for joining us. Unfortunately, we are at the top of the hour, but I really appreciate your time. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
What a fun conversation. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. Again, check out Corporate Underpants. That's Tamara's podcast, or Never Search Alone if you are looking for some job search support. Now, this episode is part of our Women in Tech series at the So You Think You Can Dev podcast. We really appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks again. Bye.